Yeah, brushes with death. That was a big part of a lot of the stuff I was checking out when I first realized that this stuff was to be taken seriously, was near-death experiences, the DMT people, and other psychedelics. And then there are the sort of more overtly religious experiences like Ezekiel. I mean, Ezekiel was a big deal when I discovered that. It's just wild, because I thought it was so dumb for so long, all these biblical stories, and then to realize, like, oh my gosh, I have something in common with some of these people. A lot of these podcast type things are going to be me just kind of trying to share my awe and my shock, I guess. I'm in this constant state of astonishment about a lot of this stuff. When I woke up, I did sort of spontaneously start engaging in sort of some ritualistic activity. It does say this in a lot of sort of spiritual literature, that sometimes it's given as advice to people who are trying to change their sort of thought patterns and their relationship with their inner world. The advice will be like, go back to something that you really loved when you were a child or when you were younger, and try to, see if that sparks something new. For me, that was crystals and stones and that kind of stuff. Not for any spiritual reasons. It was just about the beauty of nature in this weird way of like looking at these crystals and kind of thinking like, man, that is just so miraculous. And so when I woke up, I started frequenting this bookstore, which was kind of perfect. And I would buy a couple rocks and I would try meditating with them, and I'd leave them around the house. At some point, I realized like everywhere I looked in the house, I could see one of these rocks or crystals. And the message that I was sort of conditioning myself to every time I would see one of these things in my house, it was remember. Literally just that. It was like, don't forget, what has happened. I did kind of realize like I was ritualizing my environment in this weird way just to help keep me centered. And then I started doing these meditation experiments with the rocks. And eventually I realized that I didn't need the ritual and that it was the power of the mind. If I started to believe that these rocks and crystals could affect my meditation, they would. It was about a mental state, a state of being. And I equate that with the Holy Spirit in the Christian mythology. The Holy Spirit is really a great way, I think, to sort of connect with a mental state where you're oriented properly, where there's nothing missing. The rituals, they can become a crutch. Man, this is a great little moment. So during this period that I'm talking about, this is 2013, first waking up, I'm not only buying these rocks and putting them around my house, but I'm also carrying a couple in my pocket. And I used to live in Philly, and I lived about a block from a Whole Foods, so I'm at the Whole Foods, almost every day. And one day, I pull out my wallet, I pay for my stuff, I go home, I reach in my pocket, and I realize one of my little crystals is gone. And I immediately feel this anxiety. I gotta find it. And I'm disturbed by how disturbed I am by this crystal being missing. And I run to the Whole Foods. I go to the register where I was at, and there it is on the floor, and I feel this immense relief. Which is so crazy, that I could allow myself to be so manipulated by this ritual. And I guess that's like a perfect story to sort of talk about what Paul is saying here, that the rituals can become a crutch. And maybe you're not doing the real work if you're relying on the ritual forever. The ritual can maybe get you over the hump, because meditation, yoga, like all these things could be equated to being kind of like rituals, If you're stopping for a moment and you're focusing on your breath to sort of break the chain of a train of thought, that's kind of like a ritual. And ideally, you shouldn't have to stop and take these breaths. Yes, we all have these strategies that we try to use to maintain balance. But yeah, like the rituals can become a crutch. These days, I find I have to meditate less and less in order to achieve that balance. Though, since my awakening, I have taken a few steps back, to be honest. I mean, I had a few months where I was really kind of blissfully healed. But then, I slowly came back to earth. I've had to really flex all of my spiritual muscles in order to maintain balance, and it's not been easy. It's been infinitely easier than what it would have been when I was just an atheist. But still, the work is not done. We should all strive to get to the point where, we don't need meditation. We might use meditation, like in a natural sense. This relationship between meditation and prayer was something I talked about recently, but I think it was like a big part of my awakening was realizing that, the mind is the most powerful tool that we know of. If you're using that tool on yourself in a way that is not the intended use of the tool, you're really going to damage yourself. You can use all types of tools for all types of tasks. You could use a screwdriver as a hammer, but you're going to damage the screwdriver. And that's kind of, I think, a great analogy for what we're all doing when we're not oriented properly. We're not trying to live in the Holy Spirit, for instance. Trying to have this proper aim. We're using this immensely powerful tool to try to fix something that we don't know what we're doing, and I feel like when I was an atheist, that's what a lot of my mental world was like. I think everybody's pretty familiar with that. If you have an active mind and an active imagination, a lot of times your thoughts will just lead you in circles. And it's like dangerous. You can really mess yourself up, and I think that was the story of my 20s and 30s, was just wrecking myself with this brain that I didn't know how to use properly,